So we are seeing stocks, especially the major averages, kind of take a little bit of a leg lower. As you say, it's a relatively minor one, but a leg lower from the highs of the session. It's particularly notable in the Dow because the Dow's been the sort of most vulnerable index of the day, with weakness in the likes of IBM and Johnson & Johnson that have been causing it to underperform today. So now that underperformance is more notable as it actually turns a little more solidly negative. The S&P and the Nasdaq hanging on to gains, taking a little bit of a leg lower. And the Russell 2000 still higher by 0.4%. And I want to focus in on the Russell because when we talk about trade concerns, the Russell is seen as being more resilient, more resistant to those concerns, even though obviously it's subject to inflation pressures. But because of many of these companies are more domestically oriented, would not necessarily be subject to tariff and trade war pressures. So you can see here the Russell 2000 relative to the S&P 500, and then it's been on an upward trajectory in terms of its performance. Indeed, the Russell 2000 is now only about 1.5% below its record high. By contrast, the S&P 500 is about 5.5% below its record high. So the Russell has come back in more decided fashion. It's also interesting to look at the weightings in the two indices here. Financials, interestingly, have a heavier weighting in the Russell, although as we've seen, there's been the flattening of the yield curve recently that has weighed on the larger cap financials. That has not seemed to slow down the Russell as much. It's got a smaller weighting in technology, a bigger weighting in healthcare, as well as consumer discretionary. So all of these things to consider as we look at that relative performance and weigh the effects of the potential tariffs and the potential trade war. Now, elsewhere, you just heard Julia talking about what's been going on in commodities, and it's been a pretty remarkable several days. The Bloomberg Commodity Index up 1.5%. Crude oil has been climbing ahead of the OPEC meeting in Saudi Arabia, and also, as we got today, larger than estimated drawdown in crude oil inventories. Indeed, since late February, there's only been 1 week where the combined oil and refined products has not seen a drawdown. Also, we've been seeing big moves in aluminum and nickel. Aluminum, as we see various companies that use aluminum try to stockpile ahead of Rusal sanctions taking effect, and nickel also getting a boost on demand for nickel used in batteries in electric vehicles. We're also watching transportation stocks today. It'll be interesting to see if we see any hit to these companies from concerns over inflation. For example, the Dow Jones Transportation Average still up by 2% at the moment. UAL, CSX both out with earnings, and so those shares have been seeing a big lift. And again, it doesn't look like that lift has slowed in the wake of this Beige book commentary here today. And then American Airlines has also been getting a lift there.